Paul, I feel, as I said, we're at your party here, and so we're going to entertain your guests. We were just having a fascinating conversation that has completely changed the way I was going to open this. And we were talking about communicating science and good science and bad science. And this gentleman this morning asked a question essentially about bad science being published in journals. I want to thank you for that interesting question. And it occurred to me as an MSNBC contributor, is there sort of an MSNBC and a Fox and an NPR and a CNN of the scientific journal community that essentially what's happened is, you know, I look at Margaret Lowe, used to be head of NPR at the news division there, and so you know, for many people, NPR is the thing that gives it straight and without bias, et cetera. Maybe some people would disagree with that, but I think part of the interesting question is, has science become channeled, if you will, into not what leads us into rational understanding of what needs to happen, but rather politics is becoming part of the equation?
Well, I mean, there are scientific journals that are considered to be excellent scientific journals. You know, New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, Science, Cell.
So that's NPR.
The great ones. That's like the, but you know, it's an imperfect system. I mean, you know, there was an article published in the early 1980s in the New England Journal of Medicine by a Harvard epidemiologist claiming that excess coffee drinking caused pancreatic cancer. That was wrong, and study after study showed that that was wrong, and that's the strength of science. I mean, I think one should be skeptical of scientists. I think one should be skeptical of any paper that's published, independent of where it's published.
Right.
But the strength of science is its reproducibility. If that contention was correct, then other studies done by other investigators using other populations will show that it's correct. I think science stands on two pillars that sort of gets to this man's question earlier, one of which is much weaker than the other. The first pillar, which is the weaker pillar, is peer review.
Right.
I think it's a flawed system. I mean, it's a human endeavor, and humans are flawed. I think reproducibility is the great catchment, though. If you're wrong, there's no hiding. I mean, Andrew Wakefield published his paper claiming that MMR caused autism in the Lancet. That's an excellent general medical journal, one of the oldest general medical journals. That was wrong, and it was shown to be wrong.
How did the modern anti-vaccination movement begin?
I think it began on April 19th, 1982. That was when Lee Thompson, who was a veteran executive producer at NBC, put out a 1-hour documentary called DPT Vaccine Roulette. And that was a dramatic show. It showed a series of children whose parents all told the same story. My child was fine, then they got this whooping cough or pertussis vaccine, and look what happened. And you saw these children who had bicycle helmets, that were seizing, that had withered arms and legs, drooling, staring up vacantly in the sky. And these parents told these dramatic, heartfelt stories that the pertussis vaccine had caused permanent brain damage. Now, that wasn't true. Epidemiological study after epidemiological study showed that that wasn't true. Eventually, although it took 25 years, we had the genetic tools in hand to enable us to go back and look at these children to find out that they really had something called a sodium channel transport defect, or Rett syndrome, which obviously wasn't caused by vaccines.
Has NBC done an equally powerful review of that genetic basis?
No, maybe MSNBC can do it.
Yeah, I'll transmit the message.
So I think that crossed the line. I think now suddenly people had the notion that vaccines weren't the lifesaver they were claiming to be. Maybe they were doing more harm than good. And there were congressional hearings. Ultimately, there was a group formed called Dissatisfied Parents Together, get it, DPT, which became the National Vaccine Information Center, which is Barbara Fisher's group. That's the premier anti-vaccine group.
So what would you do given this terrain? Because I've noticed in the Daily Beast articles you write, I recommend them. Paul is a regular contributor, I guess, to Daily Beast on all these issues. You become rather strident in terms of encouraging folks to take on this community and not get deluded by the fact that there's some sort of rights-based rejection of science.
I think I've always been strident, but thank you. I think, sure, it's just, you know, we especially our medical students, our young medical students today are trained to be open, differently than I'm trained, in many ways better, to be open to sort of all kinds of attitudes and beliefs, especially cultural differences. And I think that's good. But on the other hand, when a parent chooses not to vaccinate their child, when they choose to send them out into a world that is becoming progressively more dangerous, more measles, more whooping cough, more mumps, it's a bad choice based on bad information. And I think it's okay to step in there and to be prescriptive, to be tough, to say, let me love your child. Don't put me in a position as a physician to send them out into a world that's progressively more dangerous. You know, don't ask me to practice substandard care. Please don't put me in that position. And it's hard for us to do that. I think we like to.
But you've gone further, as I know. You've said anti-vaxxers are screaming fire in a theater.
Yeah, I think actually the group that was here before with Chris Erisman and the imam, that when there was an outbreak of measles in Minneapolis or in Hennepin County, Minnesota, you know, that ultimately involved 79 children having to suffer needlessly. There was an anti-vaccine person, Mark Blaxell, who came into that community and said, don't listen to the public health people. Don't get your vaccine. This was during an outbreak. There was a clear and present danger. I'm sorry, that violates your First Amendment rights. And you're right, that's what I wrote in that piece.
You were telling me that in inventing the rotavirus vaccine, that was a 26-year effort, and that you know, that's there, and you're in touch with everybody kind of in the vaccine community. I'm just sort of interested in the question we started out this morning and kind of connecting some of the dots today. As you look at your 26 years of research to get to that point, what do you think the big game changers are in science that may bring down that length of time, that give us new opportunities? I mean, given the fact that you achieved something before technology was where it is today, what excites you and what disturbs you?
Well, remember, it's when you were trying to make vaccines, say in the 1960s, the measles vaccine, the mumps vaccine, the German measles vaccine, then you would do trials that would involve 3,000 children, 5,000 children, and you could, Maurice Hilleman, who was mentioned earlier, you know, he isolated the mumps virus from his daughter that became that vaccine in 1963. That was a commercial vaccine in 1967. That could never happen today. You know, the bar that one has to meet is not to just prove or disprove uncommon side effects pre-licensure, but to disprove, frankly, rare side effects pre-licensure. So therefore, the number of children that are tested, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials are much bigger and more expensive, and so the efforts don't become 4-year or 5-year efforts. They become 20 or 25-year efforts, and they become billion-dollar efforts. So that's fine, because I think, you know, we're giving, vaccines are a product that are given to healthy children. So they should be held to a very high standard of safety, and they are.
And do you think that's happening consistently here around the world? What is your sense of the health of that ecosystem for research? And
yeah, I think the research ecosystem is excellent. I think science that's done in this country as well as other countries is excellent. I worry that, as David Weiner alluded to earlier, that there is a fraying of the vaccine infrastructure. I mean, we had 27 companies that made vaccines for America's children in 1955. By 1980, that was 18 companies. Today, there's really 4 or 5 companies. And that's true also in the world, that there seems to be some fraying of the infrastructure, because the fact of the matter is vaccines are something you give once or a few times in your lifetime. They're never going to be big money makers. They're never going to be blockbusters. They're not going to be like lipid-lowering agents or psychiatric drugs and neurological drugs. They're never going to be blockbusters. And I think when they're made just by big companies, which is true now, I mean, Merck being one example, they tend to be the weaker sister within the bigger pharmaceutical product.
You know, one of the other things you and I were chatting about were just the times we're in. They feel more fragile. Science seems to be in a more desperate situation in a sense of having to defend itself from communities more. And I'm interested in your insights into that, whether, because you've been through, it's not like Andrew Wakefield just happened. There's been a community that has long questioned science, long questioned vaccinology, you know, vaccines and the profession and science in general. But what do you think is going on in the country where what, at least to me, seem to be fringe views have become more mainstream views?
It's certainly not new. I mean, certainly evolution denialism is not new. You know, fears, unfounded fears about fluoridation is not new. I mean, if you want a sort of a wonderland of false beliefs about science, just go to the Whole Foods store at 10th Street, and you can see you can buy your GMO-free foods and your BPA-free foods. I mean, this is not good science. But, so I don't think that's new. Climate change denialism is new. What's new, I think, is that you have an administration that sort of embraces that. I mean, you know, the head of the EPA, the head of the Energy Department are climate change denialists. Our president is a climate change denialist. You know, you have a vice president and a head of the secretary of the Department of Education who are evolution denialists. I mean, that's frightening, actually, that we're willing to not deny science at that level.
So what is science's response? You know, one of the questions, and looking at at some of the material and talking to many of you that are engaged not only in science but communications. You work with communities in states. You deal with a lot of children. What is do you just sit back and take it, or what are the marketing communication methodologies that you think need to be brought to bear?
I think people need to understand what science is and what it isn't. What it isn't scientists, it isn't scientific textbooks, it isn't even accumulated knowledge, frankly. I mean, as you learn more as you go, you're willing to sort of throw that over your shoulder without a backward glance. Science is a process whereby that's mutable, that's changeable. We're constantly learning, and I think that's uncomfortable for people. I think one of the reasons that Andrew Wakefield has the sort of limited following he has is that he is immutable. I mean, he sees a certain truth and he sees the light, and although no one else seems to, in the science world seems to believe him, he knows that it's true. And for some parents, that's really attractive. Mehmet Oz, Deepak Chopra, this kind of guru phenomenon, I think is very attractive. I mean, I think if you ask people in this audience whether or not we will know more 100 years from now about diseases of people, I think everyone would say yes. But yet, if they have a disease, a specific disease, they would like to believe we know everything we need to know about that disease right now, even though that may not be true. I mean, we take our best guess based on the information that we have. And I think that's disconcerting for some. And also, again, scientists get it wrong all the time. That's okay. I mean, Brian McMahon got the coffee causes pancreatic cancer, story wrong, which caused people to hesitate about whether they drink coffee, not stop drinking coffee. They're willing to stop getting vaccines, but not stop drinking coffee. And see, people will say, see, that's why you can't trust science, but that's why you can trust science, because it is self-correcting. There is no hiding if you have a bad hypothesis. And I think people need to understand that, I mean, there's Nobel Prizes that were awarded. There was a Nobel Prize awarded in 1935 to Igaz Moniz for the development of psychosurgery that essentially lobotomies could cure schizophrenia, could cure manic depressive illnesses. That was wrong, and time showed that it was wrong, but we performed lobotomies in this country up until the 1970s.
That's fascinating. One of the things that's been interesting to me is they hear the name Maurice Hilleman about 20 times at this conference, and I've never heard of him before, and that's my own ignorance. But I knew Andrew Wakefield way before, and one of the things and you're the Maurice Hilleman Endowed Professor, I guess, at the University of Pennsylvania, and I think everyone here knows who he is and the contributions that he made. Andrew Wakefield has been popularized in movies. In fact, you appear in the movie, as I understand, the Pathological Optimist or something like that.
Not willingly,
yeah,
but
yeah,
just
yeah. And so I am interested in the notion of celebrities in science, since you've mentioned Nobels, and why someone who's made such profound contributions in the area of vaccinology is not well known out there popularly, but someone like Andrew Wakefield, who has was credited with sort of leading with a lot of the vaccination movement, is so better known.
So I think, well, here's what I would say. I think Jonas Salk is well known.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
so there's
and Louis Pasteur is well known.
And Louis Pasteur is well known.
But it took hundreds of years.
Albert Sabin, maybe to some extent, is well known. It'll be interesting to ask people less than 30 years old whether they know Salk and Sabin. But and the reason is that the March of Dimes was a private philanthropic organization that held him up as their poster boy in many ways. Here's what we can do. Here's the science that Dr. Salk is doing. He was on TV. He was on the radio. He was a celebrity scientist at that time in the 1950s and 60s. And to some extent, so was Albert Sabin. So I think there's that. Hilleman worked for a company, and I think one, we don't like our heroes to come from industry. We like them to come from academia. I think, with all due respect to Merck, I do think they didn't do a lot to publicize him then. Although interestingly, Maurice Hilleman was on a CBS evening news once with Charles Collingsworth, I think, Collingsworth. But in any case, he was on that. But you're right. That he was never the celebrity. So I think Andrew Wakefield is popular because he has a solution to a problem that medicine doesn't have a solution for. He knows what causes autism, even though he's wrong. Plus, he's well-spoken, he's attractive, and he has a British accent. This is it. I think that's part of it. We're willing to turn ourselves back to the Queen, I think, now, given that.
No, but I think it's interesting because, in terms of thinking about our discussions today on global public health, domestic public health, so much of it, even with Kristen, with what was going on in the state of Minnesota, so much of it comes out to reaching community leaders, communicating, figuring new ways, Vivek Murthy and Elmo. And I'm just, it's just leading me to this question, because you are actually a good communicator, and you're thoughtful both about how to reach kids and children and sort of change the vector where recalcitrant parents may not be in the game. that's a different question than science, right? That's a function of marketing and communications and other kinds of networks, and whether or not we need to have greater investment in that kind of thing, whether that might move it forward. And then I'm going to go to all of you for questions on this. But you know, you are a communicator, and you are in these networks, and you do play a leading role. What would you feel would be great help in that you don't have today to actually take back some of the territory in the vaccination arena?
Right. So I think scientists need to get in the game. I think no one can explain what they do better than them because they're doing it. So I do think they need to understand what it means to communicate science. But first of all, it's harder because, you know, I think only 1 of every 300 minutes on television, for example, is devoted to science. I think most people in the general public, when they hear the word science, their eyes glaze over because now they're about to be bored by something. So I think you have to make what you do dramatic and exciting and entertaining, because the fact that, I mean, I was funded by the National Institutes of Health through the R01 mechanism for 25 years. I mean, who paid my salary? It was the public that paid my salary. It was the taxpayer that paid my salary. And the taxpayer can just as quickly decide not to pay that salary. So they need to understand what they're getting for this money and why it's so important. But I think scientists need to do it. And that's hard because I think that the scientist personality tends to be somewhat introverted, right? That's the old joke. What's the difference between an introverted scientist and an extroverted scientist? You know, an introverted scientist, when they talk to you, will look down at their shoes, but an extroverted scientist will look down at your shoes. I think that's true. So I think, and the training also for science is to be very careful about what you say, never to go beyond your data. Technically, you can't say MMR doesn't cause autism. You can't. You can never prove never. You can only say that all the evidence you have doesn't support that hypothesis, which sounds like a door is being left open. So the language has to be altered a little bit. And so Alan Alda, for example, has a program at Stony Brook where he's trying to teach scientists how to communicate science to the public. But I think that's a good start.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, let me open up the questions, comments. Yes, right back here in the back, the gentleman we started with this morning.
Thank you.
No, she's going to bring a microphone to you. We have millions and millions and millions of people watching online who want to hear. Yes.
I'm Rui Chow at the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy in the University of Sciences. First, I'd like to congratulate the Atlantic for bringing this very important question. And secondly, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Offit, Otter, isn't it?
Offit.
I think I met you once before. But anyway, this question that you raised is very important. That scientists, so there may be a forum for the Atlantic to discuss what is good science, what is bad science. Unfortunately, scientists don't really know. The reason is that we have been fooled ourselves to a great extent. And there are a number of publications which really are addressing this. In particular, the reproducibility of science. The science is not really that reproducible, unfortunately. There are several papers that really show this, this aspect. One of the major points is that scientists don't quite really understand the basis of analysis using statistics. And we generally say the significance of 0.05 or really lends the credence to our hypothesis. But in fact, that is wrong. And so I think this is really what I think education of scientists, by statisticians, will be a very important aspect.
Thank you very much. Quick
I'll push back a little bit. I mean, I think that sometimes there are studies that are done that are not reproduced, which makes you wonder whether or not the study was correct. I mean, the question, for example, whether MMR caused autism, I think that you have reproducibly seen now 17 studies done in 7 countries on 3 continents involving hundreds of thousands of children that showed that that was wrong. So that's reproducible. Therefore, to me, that is now a fact. So climate change is a fact. Evolution is a fact. I mean, so there are
But
facts.
I think to go back to my first question in our conversation, one of the things that interests me is that if you're in the Lancet or if you're in very legitimate publications, you can see a debate, you can see people take on and test your views. You also said, though, that there is a trend where anyone with money can go out and find some vanity publication and put something out there that has some digest. And to some degree, that's part of what we're talking about today. And that's when I ask about the Fox, the MSNBC, the Breitbart of news production, whether or not that becomes a problem because you're competing not really over science, but about something that's not subjected to that same rigorous standard.
You're right. The so-called predatory journals, where you can get anything published. Anybody can get anything published as long as they're willing to pay the publication fee. It's sad, but it's a reality. It's a sad reality.
Let's take one quick one here, one quick one there. Yes.
Hi, Ken Kelly, NIH. So skip science, skip the news. What about fiction What about Hollywood?
Great.
Harvard School of Public Health did a big campaign in Massachusetts that was anti-smoking, tobacco control. And I apologize, I don't remember the name of the professors group, but they went to Hollywood and tried to get anti-smoking in movies and TV shows as a way to promote, to play on emotion, if you will. And it had a much better audience. So why not that approach?
Yeah, why not there?
I think that, I agree. I think that's a great idea. I think Mad Men probably set that whole notion back about 10 years, but you're right. I mean, I think that's a good point.
Great, and this gentleman right here. Big round of applause for Emily, who's running like crazy.
Craig Steiner, a physician. So I want to just change this slightly. It's just focusing on the physicians providing, and the nurses are providing the vaccine. So if the standard of care is to give a vaccine from a pediatrician, and the physician is told not to give the vaccine by the patient's mother, parent, is he actually now practicing as a malpractice? I mean, because he's not meeting the standard of care for the community.
It's an interesting question. So for example, Steve Black, when he was head of Northern California Kaiser Permanente, tells the following story. There was a woman who came to, this is before the American Academy of Pediatrics declination form, but it's a woman who brought her child in to see the doctor, and she refused vaccines, including the Haemophilus influenza B or Hib vaccine. 2, 4, 6 months of age. What the doctor did was he actually had the patient say, I've just been told vaccines are good, vaccine preventable diseases are bad, and I'm choosing not to get a vaccine. Signed it, 2, 4, 6 months of age. At 11 months of age, the child got Hib meningitis and was permanently damaged by that infection. She then turned around and sued the doctor, arguing that by continuing to see her, he was at least tacitly agreeing that what she was doing was okay. Sadly, it was settled out of court for a lot of money. I wish it had gone to court, you know, and that if she had won in court, that at some level at least lets the physician know where they stand. I think in general, no, I don't know of any other suits like that that are going on out there. But it is when you choose. I mean, I'll give you another example. So at Children's Hospital Philadelphia, we saw this was within the past year and a half. We saw a child in our outpatient clinic at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. The parents had recently converted to Muslim. They felt that meant that they shouldn't vaccinate their child, although there's nothing in the Muslim faith that says not to do that. At 11 months of age, 12 months of age, the child got Streptococcus pneumoniae meningitis caused by a strain that would have been in PCV 13. And did badly. I mean, herniated. You know, brain presses down on the brainstem. We intubated the child and saved his life, but he will never see or walk or speak or hear again. Now, we saw that child in our clinic at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. We let that child walk out of that clinic at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. Are we at some level responsible, even tacitly agreeing with what had happened? I think we are. I don't know if I don't think we're legally responsible. I don't think those parents are going to turn around and sue us, but that's why I think at the very least what a physician needs to do is be passionate, and compassionate and prescriptive. And although we can never leave the science, I think you have to frame that science in an emotional way to let parents know that when they make this choice, they're not making a risk-free choice. It's a choice to take a different and more serious risk, and this is what that risk looks like.
Well, I look forward to your future Daily Beast contributions. And if you have time on the side to invent any other vaccines, go for it. But ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Paul Offit with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very, very much.